Snow fell without mercy, burying the ruins like massive tombstones stretching toward a gray infinity. The recon team was trapped in the heart of the abandoned city, ammunition running dry, communications severed. The enemy tightened their noose meter by meter. When desperation reached its final threshold, a sound barely registered, not an explosion, but an absence. One hostile dropped without warning. Then another. No one saw her. No one heard her. But from that moment, the tide of battle began to turn. The wind carved through empty streets like a blade through bone. Corporal Jackson Hayes pressed his back against the frozen concrete, watching his breath crystallize in the air before him. 6 days behind enemy lines. 4 men left from 7. Movement, northeast corner, 200 meters. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb's voice crackled through the radio, barely audible over the static. Hayes adjusted his grip on the M4, ice crystals forming on the metal despite his gloved hands. The city sprawled around them like a corpse. Vladislav, population 0, abandoned 3 months into the conflict when the front lines shifted north. Intel said it would be empty. Intel was wrong. Private First Class David Chen moved up beside Hayes, his face pale beneath the white camouflage paint. "We're being watched, Corporal. I can feel it." Hayes didn't disagree. Every instinct honed over 2 tours screamed the same warning. The silence was too complete, too deliberate. Even abandoned cities had ambient noise, wind through broken windows, snow sliding off damaged roofs, the settling of debris. This place offered nothing. "Webb, what's your count?" Hayes whispered into his radio. 3 hostiles confirmed. "Probably more we can't see. They're setting up positions in the factory complex." That made it worse. The factory dominated the eastern approach, 4 stories of reinforced concrete with perfect sightlines across the avenue. If the enemy controlled that structure, the recon team's escape route was gone. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison appeared from a blown-out storefront, blood seeping through a bandage on her left arm. The ambush 2 hours ago had caught them crossing an exposed intersection. PFC Rodriguez was dead. Specialist Thompson had taken shrapnel to the leg and could barely walk. "Options?" Morrison asked, her voice steady despite the situation. Hayes looked at the map spread across his knees, already knowing the answer. "None good, ma'am. North is the factory crawling with hostiles. South puts us deeper into enemy territory. East and west are open ground. We'd be cut down in 30 seconds. Webb slid down beside them, frost clinging to his beard. "Radio's completely dead. Whatever's jamming us has serious range." Morrison studied the map, her jaw tight. 28 years old, West Point graduate, 3 years in the Rangers. She'd led them through worse. But Hayes saw the calculation in her eyes, the math that didn't balance. "We hold here until dark," she decided. "Then we move south, find another position, try to break through the jamming." It wasn't a plan. It was hope wrapped in tactical language. Chen shifted nervously. "Lieutenant, those hostiles aren't random patrols. They knew we'd be here. This whole thing feels like a trap," Webb finished. "Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing." The temperature dropped as afternoon faded. Hayes distributed the remaining ammunition, 3 magazines each, 1 fragmentation grenade, 2 smoke canisters. Thompson sat propped against a wall, pale and sweating despite the cold, his leg wound worse than he'd admitted. Morrison checked her watch. 3 hours until dark. 3 hours to figure out how to extract 4 soldiers from the center of a kill zone, with no support, no communications, and enemies who somehow knew exactly where they'd be. The snow continued falling, erasing their tracks, erasing everything. The first shot came at 1,647 hours. Hayes saw the muzzle flash from a 3rd-story window across the street instinct, throwing him sideways as the bullet sparked off concrete where his head had been. "Contact! 3 o'clock!" The team scattered. Webb returned fire, controlled bursts that shattered what remained of the factory windows. Chen dragged Thompson deeper into cover, while Morrison laid down, suppressing fire with her M4. "Multiple shooters!" Webb shouted. "North and east!" Hayes counted 5 distinct firing positions, maybe more. They'd walked into a carefully prepared ambush, and now the enemy was springing it with professional precision. A grenade arced through the air, smoke trailing. Hayes saw it, knew they couldn't reach it in time. "Grenade!" and threw himself behind a concrete pillar. The explosion shook the building, sent debris raining down, left his ears ringing. Chen screamed. Hayes looked up, saw the private clutching his shoulder, blood streaming between his fingers. Thompson was unconscious, hit by shrapnel again. "We need to move." Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Webb, smoke." The staff sergeant popped both canisters. Gray smoke billowed across the street, buying them seconds. They moved as one unit, Hayes and Webb carrying Thompson, Morrison supporting Chen, all of them running through the blinding cloud toward a partially collapsed building 50 meters north. Bullets tracked them through the smoke. Hayes felt one tug at his pack, another ricochet off his helmet. They crashed through a doorway into darkness, kept moving, didn't stop until they'd put 3 walls between themselves and the kill zone. Morrison did a quick count. Chen, how bad? Through and through, ma'am. I can still shoot. Thompson remained unconscious, his breathing shallow. Webb applied pressure to the leg wound while Hayes checked the perimeter. The new position offered better cover, but was still surrounded. Through the broken windows, he could see enemy forces repositioning, cutting off every approach. Radio still dead? Morrison asked. Webb tried again, got only static. They're jamming everything. We're isolated. The lieutenant studied their situation with the clinical detachment of someone who'd already accepted the probable outcome. 4 soldiers, 2 wounded, surrounded by superior forces with no communications and no reinforcements. The math was simple and brutal. We hold until dark, she said again. Then we try to break south. No one argued. They all knew it was suicide. But staying was guaranteed death. Hayes distributed the last of the ammunition, 2 magazines each now. Chen's shoulder wound was bad. He could shoot right-handed but couldn't help carry Thompson. Webb was their best shot with the remaining M249 light machine gun, 20 rounds left in the belt. Outside, the enemy moved with confidence. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. Time was on their side. Morrison caught Hayes' eye. In that look, he saw the same thought he'd been having. They weren't getting out. The snow fell heavier now, reducing visibility to 50 meters. It would hide them during the escape attempt, but it would also hide the enemy waiting in ambush. Chen fumbled with his radio, trying different frequencies out of desperation. Nothing but static and the occasional burst of coded enemy traffic confirmation. They were completely cut off. 2 hours until dark, Webb said quietly. Then we run or die here. Morrison checked Thompson's pulse. He won't survive the night without medical attention. The unspoken implication hung in the cold air. If they ran, they'd have to leave him. If they stayed, they'd all die. Command decisions in war often came down to choosing between terrible options. Hayes moved to a window, scanning the enemy positions through his scope. Professional soldiers, well-equipped, moving with tactical discipline, not local militia. This was a regular army unit, possibly special forces. They're not just trying to kill us, he said. They're studying us, testing response times, tactics. Morrison nodded. We're not the mission. We're bait for something bigger. That made it worse. It meant even if they somehow escaped, the enemy had already won. They'd mapped the infiltration routes, identified the tactics, prepared countermeasures for the next team. The lieutenant keyed her dead radio one more time, knowing it was futile. Any station, this is Ghost 2 actual. We are surrounded. Casualties critical. Request immediate extraction. How copy? Static answered. Always static. 2 hours until dark. 2 hours until they'd attempt the impossible. The trap was closed, and they were inside it. 1,200 meters west, positioned in the skeletal remains of an apartment tower, Captain Elena Volkov watched through her scope as the Recon team fought for survival. She'd been tracking them for 3 days. Not officially. Her orders from command had been clear. Maintain position, gather intelligence, do not engage. The American team was bait to draw out larger forces. Standard doctrine. Let them die, learn from their mistakes, use the intelligence to prevent future incursions. Elena had acknowledged the orders, then ignored them. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope mounted on her custom Shaytak M200, the battlefield resolved into crystalline clarity despite the falling snow. She'd counted 14 enemy combatants surrounding the Americans, a mix of regular infantry and at least 2 specialist hunters. The Americans didn't know they were being watched by both sides. Elena adjusted her position, settling deeper into the nest she'd prepared. White camouflage netting draped the shattered window, breaking up her silhouette. A heating pad beneath her kept the cold from affecting her aim. Years of Arctic training had taught her that comfort equals accuracy at extreme range. She'd earned her call sign through 2 wars. Zimny Prizrak Winter Ghost. 73 confirmed kills. 0 confirmed sightings. Command didn't advertise her existence. Snipers of her caliber were strategic assets, and strategic assets worked best when the enemy didn't know they were there. The rifle before her was a masterpiece, hand-loaded. 408 Chaytak rounds, each one prepared personally. At this range, with this wind, she could put a bullet through a playing card. She'd done it before. Through the scope, she watched the American medic work on the wounded soldier. Good technique, calm under pressure. The team leader, a lieutenant, Elena guessed from the behavior patterns, was making the calculations. Surrender wasn't an option. The enemy didn't take prisoners this deep in contested territory. Run or die in place. Elena checked her data book. Wind readings taken every 15 minutes for the past hour. Northeast wind, 8 to 12 kilometers per hour, gusting higher. Temperature dropping. Snow falling heavier, which would affect bullet trajectory past 800 meters. She entered the calculations automatically. Muscle memory from thousands of practice sessions. The mental arithmetic was instantaneous. Now adjust for Coriolis effect. Air density. Even the rotation of the Earth at this latitude. Her spotter had died 4 months ago. Mortar strike during the Kharkov offensive. Elena had been working alone since then, and somehow the solitude felt appropriate. Easier to become a ghost when you were the only witness to your own actions. The radio on her hip crackled. Command, checking in. She didn't answer. If they asked later, she'd blame equipment failure. They'd believe it because they wanted to, because acknowledging that their elite sniper was deliberately going dark meant acknowledging they couldn't control her. Through the scope, she saw the enemy forces repositioning for the final assault. Professional movement, good discipline. The commander was smart, patient. He'd wait until full darkness, then use night vision to slaughter the trapped Americans before they could escape. Elena had perhaps 90 minutes before the killing began. She opened her field journal, sketched the battlefield in quick, precise strokes. 14 confirmed hostiles. Multiple firing positions. Primary targets would be the enemy commander, identifiable by his positioning and radio usage, and the heavy weapons operators. No one had ordered this intervention. No one would thank her for it. In fact, Command would be furious that she'd compromised her position and her mission for 4 foreign soldiers who were already dead by tactical doctrine. Elena didn't care. She'd made a promise once, kneeling in the snow beside bodies she'd been ordered not to save. Never again. Never watch through a scope while good soldiers died because some distant commander valued intelligence over lives. The promise had cost her 2 promotions and 1 court-martial that was quietly buried when the generals realized her value. She chambered around, the metallic click, soft but final. The 408 Shaytak cartridge weighed 419 grains, carried 4,700 foot-pounds of energy. At 1,200 meters, it would arrive with enough force to punch through body armor, cinder block, or 3 men standing in a line. Elena settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing, letting her heart rate drop to 50 beats per minute. The world narrowed to the scope's view. Everything else faded: the cold, the wind, the war. 1 shot, then everything would change. The Winter Ghost was going active. The enemy commander made his mistake at 1,712 hours. He stepped into the open beside the factory wall, radio raised to his mouth, directing his forces with the confidence of someone who believed himself safe. Through her scope, Elena saw him clearly late 30s, experienced, wearing the insignia of a Guards motor rifle unit, a professional soldier, probably decorated, certainly skilled. He would die never knowing what killed him. Elena's crosshairs settled on his center mass. At this range, a headshot was possible but risked a miss if wind shifted at the wrong microsecond. Center mass was certain. She checked the wind flags one last time, strips of cloth she'd tied to the ruins at varying distances. All showed consistent northeast flow. The snow was falling heavier, but the flakes were large and slow, minimal impact on trajectory. Breath in, half exhale, hold. Her finger applied 4 pounds of pressure to the 5-pound trigger. The moment stretched, expanded, became everything. Squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, suppressed but not silent, a deep pneumatic thump that wouldn't carry beyond 100 meters. The 408 round left the barrel at 910 meters per second, covering the distance in 1.4 seconds. The enemy commander was still speaking into his radio when the bullet struck his chest. The impact lifted him off his feet, threw him backward into the wall. The radio clattered to the ground. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then chaos. The enemy forces reacted with trained discipline, dropping to cover, scanning for threats, trying to locate the shooter. But Elena was already gone from the window, moving to her secondary position 20 meters away. Through the scope from the new angle, she watched the Americans react. The team leader had seen the commander fall, was trying to process what had happened. Friendly fire, random accident, Then the medic pointed toward where the commander had been standing. No blood spray, no nearby hostiles who could have shot him. The bullet had come from somewhere else. Someone was helping them. Elena chambered another round. The enemy forces were regrouping, a sergeant taking command. Good reactions, but they were rattled. Death at extreme range had that effect, the randomness of it, the inability to fight back against an unseen threat. She waited. Patience was 90% of sniping. The other 10% was not missing. 2 minutes later, a heavy weapons operator set up a PKM machine gun in a second-story window overlooking the Americans' position. Perfect firing angle, perfect cover. He'd shred the recon team the moment they tried to move. Elena tracked him through the scope. He was careful, professional, using the window frame for concealment. Smart, but not smart enough to realize that concealment from ground level meant nothing against someone shooting from elevation 1,200 meters away. She waited until he settled behind the weapon, committed to the position. Then she fired. The bullet entered through the window at a shallow angle, struck him in the upper chest, killed him instantly. The PKM toppled forward, clattered down into the street below. More chaos. The enemy forces were panicking now, pulling back from exposed positions. They'd gone from hunters to hunted and didn't know how to process the reversal. Through her scope, Elena saw the American lieutenant organizing her team. Smart woman. She understood the opportunity someone was systematically eliminating the threats around them. But the enemy wasn't stupid. The new commander was already ordering a sweep of the surrounding high-rises. They'd find her eventually if she stayed in place. Elena gathered her equipment with practiced efficiency. The rifle broken down into its case, camouflage netting packed, brass casings collected. Never leave evidence. Never give the enemy anything to analyze. She moved through the ruined apartment like smoke, already planning her next position. The enemy would expect her to stay in the same sector. Instead, she'd circle south, set up in the industrial complex, give herself angles they wouldn't anticipate. The Americans had maybe 30 minutes before the enemy regrouped and resumed the assault. 30 minutes to prepare, to reposition, to survive. Elena intended to give them more. She keyed her radio once a single click, nothing more. Not a message, just a reminder to command that their ghost was still out there, still hunting, still ignoring orders in favor of something more important. The scope had shown her 4 soldiers fighting impossible odds, but it had also shown her what they were fighting for each other. The medic refusing to leave the wounded, the team leader making sure everyone ate before she did. The small gestures of loyalty that separated soldiers from killers. That was worth saving. That was worth the court-martial she'd face if she survived. Elena reached her new position and set up again. The enemy was still searching the apartment tower, wasting time and exposing themselves to do it. Perfect. She settled behind the rifle, let the scope show her the next target. A spotter with binoculars, directing the search teams. Important, irreplaceable in the short term. Her finger found the trigger. The Winter Ghost was hunting, and the enemy had just learned the oldest lesson of warfare. Sometimes the watcher is being watched. By 1730 hours, the enemy had identified her general location, not her exact position, but the sector from which the shots originated. Elite troops deployed in fire teams, moving through the ruins with textbook precision. Elena counted 9 hostiles dedicated to hunting her. That left only 5 surrounding the Americans. Good odds, if the recon team was smart enough to exploit them. She'd relocated to the industrial complex, 400 meters south of her previous position. The new nest offered limited angles but perfect concealment, a maintenance tunnel beneath the factory floor, accessible only through a collapsed section of wall that looked impassable. Through a carefully positioned periscope mirror, she watched the hunters work. Professionals. They moved in pairs, covering each other, checking corners and shadows. One team had a thermal scope dangerous. The falling snow would degrade its effectiveness, but not eliminate it. Elena checked her watch. 20 minutes since the last shot. The enemy would be expecting another. Pattern recognition was hardwired into survival instincts. 3 shots from the same sector suggested a rhythm, a pattern to exploit. She wouldn't give them one. Instead, she stayed motionless, barely breathing, watching the hunters close on her abandoned position. The lead team entered the apartment tower, weapons raised, moving room to room. They'd find nothing. Elena never left traces except the ones she wanted found. The thermal scope operator set up in a good overwatch position. Smart placement. He could cover 2 approaches while his partner provided security. In 5 minutes, he'd scan the entire southern sector, and the tunnel's entrance would glow white-hot on his display if he looked at the right angle. Elena calculated the angles. The mirror showing her the battlefield also reflected heat. If he scanned at the precise moment, he'd see it a thermal anomaly that didn't belong. She couldn't shoot him without revealing her position to the other 8 hunters. But she couldn't let him spot the tunnel either. The solution came from 2 wars worth of improvisation. Elena pulled a chemical heat pack from her kit, crushed it to activate, then used her rifle's cleaning rod to push it 15 meters down a drainage pipe that opened into the street. 30 seconds later, the thermal operator's partner pointed. They'd seen the heat signature, assumed it was their target. Both men moved toward it, weapons ready, communicating by hand signals. Elena used their distraction to reposition deeper into the tunnel, where concrete and earth would mask her thermal signature completely. By the time they discovered the heat pack, she'd be invisible again. But the maneuver cost her the periscope angle. She was blind now, relying on sound. Boots crunched through snow, echoing off concrete. Radio chatter, terse, professional, frustrated. They knew someone was out here. They just couldn't find her. The search intensified. She heard them moving overhead, sweeping the factory floor directly above her tunnel. Dust filtered down through cracks. One of them was standing almost directly over her position. Elena controlled her breathing. 4 breaths per minute, heart rate down to 45. In the tunnel's darkness, she became part of the stone. Footsteps moved away. Radio chatter faded. The hunters were expanding their search radius, convinced she'd relocated again. She waited 10 more minutes, ensuring they'd committed to the new search pattern. Then, she crawled forward, repositioned the periscope mirror, and studied the battlefield. The Americans had used her distraction well. They'd moved to a better position in a partially intact office building. Good defensive position, multiple exits. The lieutenant was proving her worth. But the remaining 5 hostiles surrounding them had also repositioned. They'd set up interlocking fields of fire, turning the office building into a trap. The Americans were safe for the moment, but the moment they tried to leave, they'd be cut down. Elena studied the hostile positions through the mirror. 2 machine gunners, 2 riflemen, 1 officer coordinating. Take out the officer first, disrupt command and control. Then the machine gunners. The riflemen would break without leadership and heavy weapons. But all 5 were in covered positions with limited angles. She'd get 1, maybe 2 shots before they pinpointed her location. The hunters were still close enough to respond within 60 seconds. This required different tactics. Elena checked her remaining equipment. 3 smoke grenades, 1 flashbang, 1 thermite. She'd brought them for emergency escape scenarios, but they'd work for this too. She crawled out of the tunnel, moved through the factory's basement level. The building's ancient heating system provided perfect concealment pipes and machinery, creating a maze that thermal scopes couldn't penetrate. 90 meters from the enemy positions, she found what she needed. A ground-level window with a clear throw line to the machine gunner's position. Elena primed the smoke grenades, set them on 30-second delay, then threw them in sequence. The first landed between the 2 machine gun nests. The second hit near the officer's position. The third bounced into an alley, creating a wall of gray smoke. She was back in the tunnel before the first canister popped. Thick smoke billowed across the killing ground. The enemy reacted exactly as she'd predicted. The machine gunners held position, waiting for targets to emerge from the smoke. The officer tried to coordinate, but his radio discipline broke down as visibility dropped to 0. Through the periscope, Elena watched the Americans react. The team leader recognized opportunity when she saw it. She moved her team during the confusion, using the smoke as cover, putting another 50 meters between themselves and the trap. The hostile officer realized what was happening and ordered his troops forward, trying to re-establish contact. 2 riflemen broke from cover, moving through the smoke toward the Americans' last known position. Fatal mistake. Elena had been waiting for it. The moment they entered the open, she fired. The first rifleman dropped. She worked the bolt, fired again. The second went down. Now the machine gunners knew her angle. They rotated their weapons, fired blind into the smoke, raking the factory's lower levels with sustained bursts. Bullets tore through the building, shredded the periscope mirror, filled the tunnel entrance with sparks and concrete dust. Elena had already pulled back into the tunnel's depths, where overlapping concrete walls created a bunker that even the PKM's 7.62mm rounds couldn't penetrate. The firing continued for 90 seconds, pure volume of fire meant to suppress or kill anything in the target zone. Good tactics, but they were shooting blind. When silence returned, Elena waited. The hunters would be responding, converging on the factory. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they arrived. Enough time. She crawled to the tunnel's secondary exit, a storm drain that opened into a ravine 50 meters away. The drain was partially collapsed, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, but that's why she'd scouted it in advance. Behind her, she heard boots pounding through the factory, shouted orders. The hunters had arrived. Elena emerged from the storm drain into the ravine, snow immediately covering her tracks. She'd be 200 meters away before they cleared the tunnel. Another ghost story for soldiers to whisper about. Through the falling snow, she saw the Americans moving south, finally escaping the kill zone. They'd lost visual on her, but they knew someone was still out there, still protecting them. Elena checked her ammunition. 8 rounds remaining. The hunters would regroup, angry and embarrassed. The real test was still coming, but for now, 4 soldiers who should have been dead were still breathing. That was enough. Lieutenant Morrison led her team south through streets that felt less like ruins and more like tombs. Thompson had regained consciousness, but couldn't walk. They'd fashioned a stretcher from rifle slings and jacket liners, crude but functional. Contact rear. Webb's voice cut through the wind. Single, hostile, 200 meters. Hayes spun, acquired the target through his ACOG scope. Enemy soldier, moving careless, apparently unaware he'd been spotted. Before Hayes could fire, the hostile jerked and fell. No shot, no sound, just death from nowhere. "She's still out there," Chen said, wonder in his voice, despite the pain from his shoulder wound. Morrison didn't slow the pace. "Whoever she is, she's buying us time. We need to use it." They'd covered 300 meters in the 15 minutes since the smoke attack. Good progress, but the enemy would regroup soon. Morrison's tactical sense screamed that they were in the eye of the storm, the brief calm before violence renewed. Ahead, an intact section of the old city transit station offered shelter. Morrison called a halt, positioned Webb to cover their back trail while she assessed the structure. "Defensible?" Hayes asked. "Better than open ground. Multiple exits, good sight lines." She pointed to the station's raised platforms. "Put Thompson up there. Chen, you're with him, elevated position for your shoulder. Hayes, Webb, we hold the approaches." They moved inside, the temperature marginally warmer without wind. Hayes helped position Thompson on the platform while Morrison distributed the last of their ammunition. 2 magazines each, she said flatly. "Make them count." Webb checked his M249. 30 rounds. Then it's a paperweight. The radio still offered nothing but static, but Morrison tried again anyway. Part protocol, part hope. Any station, Ghost 2 actual. 4 personnel, 2 wounded, requesting immediate extraction. How copy? The static seemed to mock them. Then faint, barely audible a voice. "Ghost 2. Broken.co, pie your .co ords?" Morrison's eyes widened. "Say again. You're broken, but readable. Interference clearing.ca, NU. Position?" Hayes pulled out his GPS, checked the coordinates. Morrison transmitted them twice, clear and slow. Whether anyone actually received them was unknown, but for the first time in hours, hope felt like more than delusion. "Movement," Webb called from his position. "Northwest, multiple contacts." Morrison joined him, counted 5 hostiles advancing with tactical discipline. The enemy had reorganized faster than she'd expected. Prepare to engage. Controlled fire. Make every round count. The hostiles spread out, using cover effectively. Professional soldiers who'd adapted to facing an invisible sniper by eliminating angles and creating overlapping fields of fire. Hayes sighted on the lead element. "Permission to engage? Wait for my mark. Let them commit to the approach." The hostiles moved closer. 75 meters. 50. They were trying to bracket the station, cut off the exits Morrison had valued. "Now!" Morrison fired, her M4 cracking in the enclosed space. Hayes and Webb added their fire, controlled bursts that caught the hostiles in the open. 2 went down immediately. The others dove for cover, returned fire. Bullets sparked off concrete, shattered what remained of the station's windows. From the platform above, Chen fired his M4, one-handed, awkward but effective. Thompson, barely conscious, kept a spare magazine ready. The firefight lasted 40 seconds, an eternity measured in heartbeats and muzzle flashes. Then it ended as suddenly as it began. The 3 surviving hostiles retreated, dragging their wounded. "Cease fire," Morrison ordered. "Conserve ammunition." Hayes conducted a quick count. Down to 1 magazine each, Webb's out of belted. The M249 was now useless. Webb set it aside, drew his sidearm a Beretta M9 with 2 magazines. "They were probing," Morrison said. "Testing our strength. Next time they'll come with everyone." "How long until extraction?" Chen called from above. Morrison checked her watch. unknown if they even received our cords. Could be 10 minutes, could be never. Webb positioned himself at a new angle, watching the approaches. "Lieutenant, I've been thinking about our guardian angel out there. She's been hitting targets in a pattern, taking out the threats that would kill us fast as commanders, heavy weapons, anyone with a clear shot at our position. She's not just protecting us, she's hurting us." Morrison considered that. Hurting us where? South. Every time we move south, we face less resistance. She's creating a corridor. Hayes saw it too. She wants us to keep moving. Standing still makes us a fixed target. Then we move. Morrison made the call without hesitation. 5-minute rest, then we continue south. "Webb, you're on point. Hayes, rear guard. I'll help carry Thompson." They used the time to tend wounds, redistribute gear, mentally prepare for the next phase. Chen's shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the pain was clearly intensifying. Thompson drifted in and out of consciousness, blood loss taking its toll. As they prepared to move, a single crack echoed across the city, distant, distinct. Through a broken window, Hayes saw one of the retreating hostiles collapse. 800 meters, maybe more, Webb said quietly. Perfect headshot in falling snow. "Whoever she is, she's not human." "She's human," Morrison said. "She's just better at this than anyone we've ever seen." They moved out, Thompson's stretcher between Morrison and Hayes, Chen and Webb providing security. The city remained eerily quiet except for the wind and their labored breathing. 2 blocks south, they found evidence of their protectors' work, 2 hostile bodies, both killed by precise shots to center mass. The wounds were massive, suggesting a large-caliber rifle. The snow around them was already covering the blood. "She cleared this path for us," Hayes said. Morrison nodded. "Then we'd better not waste it. Keep moving." Behind them, the sounds of regrouping forces grew louder. The enemy was massing for a final assault, bringing overwhelming numbers to compensate for the phantom sniper. But ahead, the path remained clear. The Winter Ghost was still hunting, and 4 soldiers who should have been dead kept moving, kept fighting, kept hoping that somewhere out there, help was finally coming. Elena had killed 16 men in the past 90 minutes. She felt nothing about it except professional satisfaction at accuracy maintained under difficult conditions. That emotional void hadn't always existed. Once, she'd felt every death, mourned every target, justified or not. War had a way of burning out those softer parts of the soul. The burning had started in Mariupol, 3 years ago. She'd been assigned to Overwatch for a Spetsnaz extraction team, 4 operators pulling intelligence assets from deep in hostile territory. Her job was simple: watch, report, don't engage unless absolutely necessary. She'd watched through her scope as the team walked into an ambush, watched as they fought, bled, called for support that command denied because the political situation was too delicate for military intervention. She'd been ordered to maintain position, gather intelligence, do not compromise the observation post. Elena had followed orders. For 6 hours, she'd watched 4 men die slowly, listened to their radio calls shift from tactical reports to desperate pleas to final prayers. Her scope could have saved them 1 shot to eliminate the enemy commander, creating chaos, buying time for escape. She'd done nothing. Orders were orders. The team leader had been a captain named Dmitry Volkov, her older brother. By the time command finally authorized engagement, all 4 operators were dead. Elena's first shot in that mission had been an execution of the enemy commander, not tactical, not professional, just raw vengeance fired through tears. The court-martial had been closed-door and classified. She'd been officially reprimanded, unofficially celebrated. Generals appreciated soldiers who followed orders even when it cost them everything. It proved loyalty, dedication, the willingness to sacrifice personal feelings for the mission. They'd promoted her 6 months later. Elena had accepted the promotion, returned to duty, continued following orders. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. She'd made a private vow in a cemetery in Moscow, kneeling beside a grave with her brother's name on it, but no body beneath. Never again. Never watch through a scope while good soldiers died because some distant commander valued politics over lives. The vow had already cost her 2 more promotions and the buried court-martial. Worth it. Some things mattered more than rank. The American team currently fighting for survival 300 meters away mattered. Not because they were Americans or enemies or anything political. They mattered because they were soldiers doing their job, and they deserved someone watching their backs. Through her scope, Elena tracked the team's movement. They'd followed her cleared path south, were approaching the old industrial district. Smart. The buildings there offered better cover, more escape routes, but the enemy had figured out her pattern. They were massing forces ahead of the Americans, setting up an ambush at the district's entrance. 20 hostiles, maybe more. Too many for her to eliminate before they overran the recon team. Elena checked her remaining ammunition. 6 rounds. Against 20 soldiers in prepared positions. The math didn't work. But math rarely did in war. She relocated to a grain silo, overlooking the industrial district's main approach. The elevation gave her perfect angles, but zero cover. Anyone who spotted her muzzle flash would have a clear shot. It was the trade-off she'd accepted the moment she started this intervention. Eventually, the enemy would locate her. Eventually, her luck would run out. But not yet. Not until those 4 American soldiers were safe. Elena settled into position, scope tracking the enemy forces as they prepared their ambush. The commander was smart. He'd positioned his troops to create a 3-sided kill box. The Americans would walk in, get cut down, game over. Unless someone disrupted the ambush before it could spring. She identified the priority targets, the commander coordinating the trap, 3 machine gunners creating overlapping fields of fire, the radio man calling in reinforcements. 5 targets, 6 rounds. She could afford 1 miss, but only 1. Elena checked the wind, adjusted for distance 680 meters to the nearest target, 840 to the farthest. Difficult but manageable. Through the scope, she saw the Americans approaching, 2 minutes until they entered the kill box. The team leader was cautious, moving slowly, checking corners, but she couldn't see the ambush. The enemy was too well concealed. Elena made her decision. The moment she fired, every hostile in the district would know her position. She'd have perhaps 30 seconds before they overwhelmed the silo. 30 seconds to save 4 lives. She thought of Dmitri, of the vow she'd made, of all the orders she'd broken to keep it. Some promises mattered more than survival. Her finger found the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the enemy commander's chest. Elena took a breath, let it out halfway, held it. The winter ghost was about to become very visible, and she was about to find out if a legend could die the same way anyone else did. The first round hit the enemy commander before his brain could process the threat. He dropped, radio clattering from dead fingers. Elena worked the bolt, acquired the second target. The nearest machine gunner was already reacting, trying to locate the shooter. She fired. Center mass. He fell across his weapon. Bolt, acquire, fire. The second machine gunner went down. Now, the enemy knew her position. Rifle fire converged on the silo from a dozen angles. Bullets sparked off metal, punched through thin walls. Elena ignored them, focused on the scope. Fourth, target the radio man. Critical kill. Without communications, the enemy couldn't coordinate the ambush. She fired through a gap in the silo's structure. 700 meters, 10-kilometer headwind, falling snow. The round caught him in the throat. He went down clutching at the wound. 2 rounds left. The third machine gunner had gone to ground, hiding behind a concrete barrier. Smart, patient, waiting for her to expose herself or exhaust her ammunition. Through the scope, Elena saw the American team. They'd recognized the gunfire, understood someone was clearing their path again. The lieutenant was rallying her soldiers, preparing to push through while the enemy was disrupted. But the third machine gunner controlled the central approach. If he stayed in position, he'd cut them down the moment they entered the open. Elena tracked the barrier, calculating angles. The gunner was completely concealed from ground level, but from her elevation, a portion of his head was visible maybe 3 inches, obscured by his helmet and the barrier's edge. Impossible shot, wind gusting, snow falling, target moving slightly, range 840 meters. She'd made harder shots. Not many, but a few. Elena adjusted her hold, compensating for the extreme angle. The ballistics were different. Shooting downward, gravity affected trajectory less, but air density changed the equation. Through the scope, she watched the gunner. He was professional, disciplined. He'd stay in that position until the Americans were dead, or help arrived. She couldn't wait for a better opportunity. The Americans were moving now, committed to the push. 30 seconds until they entered the machine gunner's line of fire. Elena centered the crosshairs on the 3-inch gap, adjusted for wind, compensated for the scope's parallax at extreme range, calculated the bullet drop approximately 12 feet at this distance. 1 round left after this, 1 chance to make it count. She controlled her breathing. Heart rate dropped to 42 beats per minute. The world, reduced to the scope's view, the wind's pressure on her face, the rifle's familiar weight. The machine gunner shifted position slightly. The gap widened 4 inches now, still barely visible. Elena fired. The 408 Chaitak round covered 840 meters in 1.6 seconds. It dropped 12 feet, drifted 18 inches left in the wind, passed through falling snow that should have destabilized it. The bullet entered the gap at a shallow angle, struck the helmet's edge, deflected downward into the gunner's exposed neck. He collapsed without firing a shot. Through the scope, Elena saw the Americans break into the open, sprinting across the kill zone that should have massacred them. They moved as a unit, the wounded helping each other, covering their angles. Professional soldiers, even in desperation. The enemy was in chaos, now 5 critical personnel dead, their ambush shattered, an invisible shooter dismantling their force with surgical precision. But chaos didn't last. Elena heard engines in the distance, reinforcements arriving, vehicles, maybe armored personnel carriers. The enemy was escalating, bringing heavy assets to eliminate both the Americans and their Phantom Protector. She had 1 round left, 1 bullet to make a difference before she had to run. Through the scope, she scanned for the highest value target. There, a technical truck mounting a heavy machine gun, racing toward the American team's position. The gunner was already traversing the weapon, preparing to fire. Range, 920 meters. Moving target. Wind still gusting. Elena led the target, calculating speed and angle. The truck was bouncing over rubble, making the shot harder. But the alternative was watching the .50 caliber shred the American team. She adjusted her aim, leading the gunner by 3 feet to account for movement. Controlled her breathing, ignored the incoming fire that was tearing through the silo around her. 1 shot, 1 chance. Everything balanced on this moment. The crosshairs settled. The trigger broke clean. The round hit the gunner in the chest, explosive energy throwing him out of the truck bed. The vehicle swerved, crashed into a ruined wall. Elena's rifle was empty. The magazine dropped free as she reached for her last reload, 6 rounds kept in reserve for exactly this situation. But the silo was coming apart under sustained fire. Concrete dust filled the air. Metal screamed as structural supports buckled. She had maybe 10 seconds before the entire structure collapsed. She grabbed her rifle, abandoned everything else the scope covers, the shooting mat, the brass casings, ran for the ladder as the floor beneath her feet started to give way. Bullets chased her down, sparking off metal rungs. She hit ground level, kept running, using the silo's bulk as cover. Behind her, the structure groaned and collapsed, raising a cloud of dust and snow. The enemy would assume she'd died in the collapse. Good. Let them think that. Elena ran through the industrial district's maze of buildings, her route planned in advance. Every step had been scouted, every turn rehearsed. She emerged from the district's south side, 200 meters from where she'd started. In the distance, she heard helicopter rotors. The Americans' extraction, finally arriving. Command had received the coordinates after all. Through binoculars, she watched the UH-60 Black Hawk descend, watched the American team sprint for the bird, watched them load their wounded, and lift off into the gray sky. 4 soldiers who should have been dead, flying towards safety. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Not satisfaction, just acknowledgement that the promise had been kept again. She disappeared into the ruins as enemy forces converged on the silo's remains, searching for a body they'd never find. The winter ghost was already gone. Already planning the next intervention, already ignoring the orders that would inevitably follow. Some vows mattered more than commands. Some promises were worth any price. The Black Hawk's door gunner laid down covering fire as Lieutenant Morrison hauled Thompson aboard. Chen followed, his shoulder wound reopened from the sprint but mobile. Hayes and Webb came last, turning to fire-controlled bursts at pursuing hostiles. "We're up!" Morrison shouted over the rotor noise. "Go! Go!" The pilot didn't need encouragement. The UH-60 lifted hard, banking away from the kill zone as bullets sparked off its armored hull. The door gunners returned fire, suppressing the enemy positions. Inside the cramped bay, the team collapsed against the webbing. A flight medic moved immediately to Thompson, starting an IV, assessing the leg wound with practiced efficiency. "Chen, let me see that shoulder," another medic ordered. Morrison slumped in her seat, adrenaline finally crashing. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, surrounded and outgunned, they'd survived. The crew chief handed her a headset. "Lieutenant Morrison, welcome aboard. We've got a 30-minute flight to friendly lines. Medical team standing by." "Copy." Morrison's voice was hoarse from shouting and cold air. "Who sent you?" "Your coordinates came through garbled but readable about 40 minutes ago. Command scrambled us immediately. Had to wait for fighter cover before we could penetrate this far into hostile territory." 40 minutes. They'd been fighting for their lives while rescue was in the air, racing to reach them. Hayes appeared beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Lieutenant, did you see her? The sniper? No. You? Nothing. She was there, then she wasn't. I've never seen anything like it." Webb joined them, his voice carrying over the engine noise. "I counted at least 8 confirmed kills from whoever that was. Maybe more. All at extreme range, most of them in conditions that should have made accurate shooting impossible." Morrison looked out the window at the receding city. Somewhere down there, their guardian angel was still moving, still hiding, still fighting her own private war. "We need to report this," Morrison said. "Command needs to know there's a shooter out there with that capability." The crew chief overheard. "Lieutenant, respectfully, I'd think twice about that report, because whoever that shooter was, she was operating without authorization. The moment you file official documentation, you force command to acknowledge her existence. That means they have to either capture her or kill her." Morrison understood. The shooter had violated orders to save them. Reporting it would be a death sentence. "I saw nothing," Hayes said quietly. "Just lucky shots from friendly forces in the area." Webb nodded. Enemy fire seemed poorly coordinated. Must have been internal command problems. Chen, overhearing from where the medic worked on his shoulder, added, "I was too injured to observe tactical details, ma'am." Morrison made the decision. "Official report will reflect that we encountered sporadic enemy contact but were able to break free through tactical movement and reached extraction coordinates. No mention of external support." The crew chief looked relieved. "Smart call, Lieutenant. Some legends are better left alone." The Black Hawk crossed into friendly airspace 20 minutes later. 16 seconds fell in alongside, escort fighters ensuring safe passage. Below, the front lines stretched like scars across the landscape. Thompson stabilized with the medic's attention, the IV fluids bringing him back to consciousness. He looked around, disoriented. "We make it?" "We made it," Morrison confirmed. "How?" "Last thing I remember, we were surrounded. No way out." "Someone was watching over us," Webb said. "That's all you need to know." The helicopter landed at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, medical teams waiting. Thompson and Chen were rushed to surgery. Hayes and Webb were cleared after quick examination, minor injuries, severe exhaustion, but combat-ready after rest. Morrison stayed behind after debriefing, standing in the cold evening air, looking north toward the city they'd barely escaped. A major from intelligence approached. "Lieutenant Morrison, I have some questions about your extraction." "Already filed my report, sir. Standard tactical movement to extraction point." "I've read your report. I've also read the enemy communications we intercepted. They reference a ghost shooter, eliminating multiple commanders and disrupting operations. Any comment?" Morrison met his gaze. "I observed enemy forces displaying poor coordination and discipline, sir. Beyond that, I have nothing to add to my official report." The major studied her for a long moment. "Understood, Lieutenant. Welcome back." As he walked away, Morrison heard him mutter, "Zimni Prizrak, Winter Ghost, urban legend, according to files. Apparently, legends have good aim." That night, in the officers' quarters, Morrison pulled out a map and marked the city they'd escaped. She circled it in red, wrote a single note in the margin. "Friendly, do not engage." It wasn't an official designation, wouldn't be in any report, but if another team operated in that area, they'd know someone was watching. Someone who didn't follow standard rules but followed something more important, the soldier's code of never leaving others behind. Somewhere in those ruins, the Winter Ghost was still out there, still hunting, still protecting strangers because of a promise that mattered more than orders. Morrison didn't know her name, her face, or her story, but she knew she owed that ghost her life and the lives of 3 soldiers under her command. That debt would never be repaid, only honored. She turned off the light, finally allowing exhaustion to take her. Tomorrow would bring debriefings, reports, questions about how 4 surrounded soldiers survived against impossible odds. Tomorrow, she'd lie convincingly. Tonight, she'd sleep knowing that somewhere, someone was still keeping watch. The Winter Ghost never slept. Legends didn't need to. Dawn came to the ruined city like a promise nobody asked for. Gray light filtered through snow clouds, painting the destruction in shades of ash and ice. Elena Volkov watched the sunrise from a new hide, 3 kilometers north of the previous night's battlefield. She'd relocated in darkness, moving through enemy patrols that never saw her, leaving no tracks in the fresh snow. The American team's extraction had been clean. She'd monitored enemy communications afterward, confusion, anger, accusations of incompetence. No mention of a single shooter. They'd convinced themselves it was coordinated special forces, multiple operators, high-tech surveillance. Better that way. Legends required mystery. She field-stripped her rifle, cleaning each component with ritual precision. The 408 Chaitak had performed flawlessly 800 rounds through the barrel now, still accurate to 1 minute of angle at extreme range. It would need replacing soon, but not yet. Her radio crackled. Command, finally tracking her down. She considered ignoring it, decided against it. Eventually, she'd need resupply, and burning all bridges with command was strategically unsound. Zimny Prizrak, report status. Elena keyed the mic. Operational. Relocated per tactical situation. You were ordered to observe, not engage. The voice carried rank, probably a colonel, definitely angry. Observed multiple hostiles in violation of operational security. Engaged per discretionary protocols. There are no discretionary protocols for, the voice cut off, replaced by someone else. Higher rank, calmer tone. Captain Volkov, General Konstantin here. How many enemy Kia? Elena had been counting. 16 confirmed. Possibly 3 more from indirect fire effects. Silence on the line. Then, and the American reconnaissance team? Extracted successfully. 4 personnel survived. More silence. She could imagine the conversation happening on the other end, political implications, operational considerations, the eternal military balance between rules and results. Captain Volkov. The general's voice had shifted. Not angry, just tired. You understand you've created a significant diplomatic situation. Understood, sir. You also understand I should have you court-martialed. Yes, sir. And you'd do it again anyway. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. The general laughed, a short bark of sound. Your brother would be proud, and furious. Probably both. Elena said nothing. Dmitri's memory didn't require comment. New orders, the general continued. Relocate to grid, November 7-3. Resupply en route. You're being attached to forward reconnaissance elements. Official capacity this time. Understood, sir. She paused. Permission to speak freely? Granted. The American team. They'll file reports. Questions will be asked. Their after-action report mentions poor enemy coordination and lucky breaks. No external support. Very professional work on their part. Elena understood. The Americans had covered for her, protected the ghost they'd never seen. Soldiers, taking care of soldiers. Acknowledge new orders, she said, moving to November 7-3. Volkov. The general's voice softened slightly. I can't officially condone what you did, but between us, well done, dismissed. The radio went silent. Elena packed her equipment, erasing all evidence of her presence. In 3 hours, this position would look like it had been empty for months. She moved through the city one last time, a ghost among ghosts. The battlefield from the previous night was already being reclaimed by snow bodies buried, blood-covered, evidence erased by winter's indifference. At the industrial district's edge, she found something unexpected. Footprints, American-issue boots, leading to a small memorial made of stacked rubble. On top, someone had left dog tags not their own, but extras carried for fallen comrades. A message, simple, untraceable, but clear. Thank you. Elena took a photo with her encrypted phone, documenting not for reports but for memory. 4 soldiers who understood that some debts couldn't be repaid, only acknowledged. She left her own message. 3 spent. 408 casings arranged in a triangle, the shooter's mark. Whoever returned to this spot would know. The ghost was real. The ghost was watching. The ghost kept her promises. Elena moved north, toward the resupply point, toward the next mission. Behind her, the city returned to silence, to snow, to the slow work of time burying all evidence of what had occurred. But in barracks and briefing rooms, in quiet conversations between soldiers who'd survived the impossible, a story would spread. Details would shift, exaggerations would accumulate, but the core would remain true. Somewhere in the winter wastes, a shooter existed who never missed, who appeared when needed most, who broke every rule except the one that mattered, never abandon your own. The Americans would carry the story home. Other units would hear it, add their own encounters, build the mythology. Intelligence services would investigate, find nothing conclusive, file it under unconfirmed reports. And Elena Volkov would continue her work, following orders when convenient, breaking them when necessary, keeping a promise made beside a grave in Moscow. Some legends were born from propaganda, carefully crafted by public relations offices. Others were born from a single choice to act when ordered to stand down, to care when taught indifference, to be human when war demanded you become something less. The winter ghost disappeared into falling snow, leaving only tracks that would be gone within the hour. But the legend? The legend would survive far longer. Because soldiers needed something to believe in when the odds turned impossible. They needed to know that somewhere, someone was watching. That in the worst moments, when ammunition ran out and hope faded, an angel with a rifle might be looking through a scope. They needed legends more than they needed truth. Elena Volkov understood this, embraced it, became it. The snow fell heavier now, white curtains closing on another battlefield. The city faded into winter's embrace, silent and still. And somewhere in that vast emptiness, a ghost kept moving, kept hunting, kept breaking rules for all the right reasons. The war would continue. The front lines would shift. Soldiers would fight and bleed and die. But they'd also whisper stories, late at night, about the shooter who never missed, about the winter ghost who saved them when no one else could, about the legend that refused to fade, the legend that was always watching, always waiting, always there when needed most, always